President Trump fully supports the bill to replace Obamacare, but the swiftest opposition isn't from Democrats, it's from conservatives on Capitol Hill. And here is one of them, Republican Congressman Mark Sanford of South Carolina, a member of the House Freedom Caucus. So good to have you on, Representative. Good evening to you.
Well, good evening to you.
House Majority Whip Steve Scalise told Republicans today, when it comes to this bill, you're either with Nancy Pelosi and you oppose the bill, or you're with the President Trump, and you support it. So are you with Pelosi here? What's going on?
I don't think so. I think that there are a number of us who simply see this in Donald Trump's world. You know, what's interesting about Donald Trump is that he would never take the opening bid in a real estate deal. I think that what has been proposed is simply the opening bid. And what a number of us have said is, look, from a conservative's perspective, might not we take a little bit here away, add a little bit here, and end up with a better bill? We had Mick Mulvaney, who's the head of the OMB, come by and meet with us last night, and he said, look, we're going to push for an open amendment process so that indeed some of these things that you're pushing for can be added. So I see this as, again, an opening bid and the tug-of-war that goes with the world of politics.
You think he's rushing it?
Yeah, I mean, what you don't want to do in a bill and a measure that's this big that impacts people to the degree that it does is rush something through. I've had 6 town hall meetings over the last 3 weekends at home, and I've heard from a lot of people. And one's health care is vital. It's in some cases life and death. It's something that people feel very, very strongly about. And so I think that from a consumer standpoint, hearing directly from people is part of the equation. And from a policy standpoint, fully vetting the bill in terms of what it costs and its implications, I think was equally important, and that takes time.
So, Congressman, so be honest with me. What are you hearing from people that's making you hesitant about what's in this bill?
Well, I think that there are many different vantage points that question. So I think.
I mean, I'm sure you're getting it. Many, people are getting it at these town halls, where people are saying they're worried about pre-existing conditions, about gaps in coverage, about the cost of health care going up. What concerns you? What are you hearing?
Well, two of the things that you just mentioned are certainly things that I've heard about, and one of the things that I've said too. I mean, at one point we had a crowd over 1,000. Tim Scott and I at one of the town hall meetings we held. And I said, look, you guys need to realize you've already won on this. The debate has changed from simply a debate on repeal to then repeal and replace. And now built into any of the different proposals that will come out from the Republican side is notion of staying on your parents' plan until the age of 26, this notion of pre-existing condition, this notion of no caps. Those things are sort of boiled into the discussion already. And I think that from a conservative standpoint, the opposite side of the equation at times from what I hear at these town hall meetings is this notion of not creating an open checkbook. I mean, the bill is presently configured, and there's already, in essence, a discussion on this at the committee level, has an open-ended commitment with regard to further Medicaid expansion for the next 3 years. I think that could be disastrous. It could create a rush for the door with a big taxpayer liability coming with it.
Okay, so you mentioned no caps. You mentioned staying on until the age of 26, and pre-existing conditions. That's Obamacare, and also the expansion of Medicaid. That's Obamacare. So, is a criticism that this is Obamacare light, or it's just the same thing, repackaged or rebranded, which Donald Trump is, the president is such a master at?
Some have said so. I mean, Speaker Boehner basically said that, I guess a couple weeks ago. He said, look, at the end of the day, you're not going to replace Obamacare. You're going to take a few things out, add a few other things, wrap it up in a bow, and call it repeal and replace. I think that if you actually look at the baseline of what's being talked about, it's much more comprehensive than that. When you talk about ending the individual mandate, if you talk about ending the employer mandate, I mean, you talk about essentially ending all taxes, save for the Cadillac tax. That's a big change. I mean, that goes to the heart of what Obamacare was all about. So I think that at the end of the day, we're talking about a more comprehensive change than that, and that's why it probably requires time.
It has to be of some concern to you that the doctors and hospitals are opposing it, as well as the American Medical Association, obviously the doctors, the American Hospital Association, the American Nurses Association, and the list goes on. I mean, do you think that are you surprised by this blowback?
Not really. I mean, because and I think this is the difficulty in complex bills. If you hear from simply one group of stakeholders, you can come up with one conclusion. What we have to do, I think, in the political process is hear from a bunch of different stakeholders, many of whom may have diametrically opposing viewpoints, try and boil those down together and move forward. And so, for instance, one of the stakeholders that's not being addressed is cost. I mean, that's why I care about this notion of an open-ended commitment with regard to Medicaid, for instance. And I think you got to look at the bill and say, well, wait a minute. If we stay on the track we're on, I mean, Medicaid was about $70 billion 10 years ago. It's about $300 billion today. That's sort of a fourfold increase over the last 10 years. If we stay on that trajectory, will we be able to keep this program sustainable? And I think what the numbers overwhelmingly show in Washington is that the answer is no, that there are more political promises on the table than we can afford to pay for. And so I think that if you simply look at the sliver of doctors have a Hippocratic oath that they're sworn to. It's absolutely natural that they're not going to worry about the costs. They're going to worry solely about the care. But one of the other stakeholders that we've got to include in this equation is how do we pay for all this stuff?
Yeah. So I've got to ask you, you've always been very straight with me and answered my questions directly. I think and I know you've heard this at town halls, why is this particular issue when it affects everyone, regardless of your political background, regardless of who you are, everyone needs health care. Why has this been politicized so much? And maybe it's a branding issue, because I've heard so many people say, you know, I like the Affordable Care Act, but I don't like Obamacare. And it's you're like, why is this so politicized, and is there a way that we can untangle and undo that? By the way, the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare are the same thing, but go on.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that.
I'm explaining to some people who may be watching who may not.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. That's the $94 question. I think that what happens is that, you know, it's the construct of the political process, which is for every issue that's out there, the people who get something from it show up and care deeply about the issue. The preponderance of people who maybe don't show up and don't care that much about it. And so let's be clear, the Affordable Care Act was well intended. It meant to do good, and it has done good for any number of different people. The problem has been in paying for it. So at home, in my state of South Carolina, we've gone from 3 providers down to 1 over the last 2.5 years. Premiums went up by 29% last year, and we have a real cost issue. And then we have another cost issue on top of that. What's that?
You can fix that without politicizing. You can address the cost of it without making it a political issue, a political football.
Yeah, but to come to one of my town hall meetings and try and pull that off, if you can do so, you ought to run for office.
I might take you up on that, but go on.
Fair enough, fair enough. What I'd say is, it is what it is. And so on the Democratic side, it got politicized, and, you know, Ms. Pelosi said, you know, after you've voted, you can read the bill, and all the different things we've heard over the years. And Republicans politicized against that, and then Democrats have politicized against this change. It's a hot-button issue, I think, because it is so vital to so many different people. And people have different perspectives as a starting point. And so I might start from a free market perspective. A lot of my friends back home may start from the standpoint of, I think we need just a single provider system. Those are very different political starting points.
I've got to go, Congressman. I had 2 people on last night who were suffering from cancer, and the cancer didn't matter if they were Democrats or Republicans. And I think both of them, at least one, started out very opposed to Obamacare and was a staunch Republican.